Mark's heart stopped when Sarah placed her hand on his arm. "I'm dying, Mark. 6 months, maybe less." The words hung in the air between them, transforming their casual Friday movie night into something unrecognizable. The medical file she'd placed on his coffee table contained the brutal truth: stage 4 pancreatic cancer that had already spread to her liver. His neighbor of 3 years, the woman whose laugh had become the soundtrack to his lonely life as a single father, was slipping away before his eyes. "I haven't told anyone else," Sarah whispered, her blue eyes swimming with tears. "Not my family, not work. Just you." The weight of her confession crushed the air from his lungs. Why him? What was he supposed to do with this terrible knowledge? His son Ethan was asleep upstairs, blissfully unaware that the woman who had become like a second mother to him was living on borrowed time. Mark felt the ground beneath him shift. He stood to lose not just a neighbor but someone who had become essential to his world, and he had no idea how to face it. Sarah's fingers trembled against his skin. "There's more," she said, her voice barely audible above the forgotten movie still playing in the background. "The reason I'm telling you first is because..." She hesitated, and Mark found himself holding his breath, sensing that whatever came next would change everything between them. The tension in the room was unbearable as Sarah pulled her hand away, tucking a strand of blonde hair behind her ear. "I've been offered an experimental treatment in Switzerland. It's a long shot, but it's my only chance. The problem is..." Her voice cracked. "I can't afford it on my own, and I need someone I trust to help me navigate this. Someone who won't treat me like I'm already gone." Mark's mind raced. His job as a high school English teacher barely covered the bills for him and Ethan. How could he possibly help financially? Yet the thought of doing nothing while Sarah fought this battle alone was unthinkable. "Whatever you need," he heard himself say, the words escaping before he could consider their implications. "We'll figure this out together." If you're moved by Sarah's courage in the face of devastating news, hit that like button and share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever had someone trust you with their deepest secret? Sarah's smile was fragile but genuine. "There's something else you should know about me," she said, reaching for her purse. She pulled out a small velvet box and placed it on the table next to her medical file. "Open it." Mark's fingers fumbled with the clasp. Inside was a diamond ring, not just any diamond, but one he recognized instantly. It was his late wife's engagement ring, stolen during a break-in 3 years ago, just weeks before the accident that took her life. "How?" he began, unable to form a coherent thought. "I used to work for the man who fenced it," Sarah explained, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. "I recognized it from the photos on your mantel. I've been trying to find a way to return it to you since the day I moved in next door. That's why I came here in the first place, to make amends, to somehow right a wrong I was indirectly part of. I never expected to." She trailed off, looking around at the home she'd become so comfortable in, at the man whose life had become intertwined with hers. Mark stared at the ring, then at Sarah, his mind struggling to reconcile the woman he thought he knew with this new revelation. The woman who helped Ethan with his science projects, who brought over homemade soup when they were sick, who sat beside him on countless evenings watching mindless television, this woman had a connection to one of the most painful chapters of his life. Was everything between them built on a lie? "Say something," Sarah pleaded, her fair skin flushed with emotion. "Hate me if you have to, but please say something." Before Mark could respond, the sound of small feet on the stairs interrupted them. Ethan, rubbing sleep from his eyes, appeared in the doorway. "Dad? I had a bad dream." The 10-year-old's gaze shifted to Sarah, then to the ring in his father's hand. "Is that Mom's ring? Did you find it?" The complexity of the moment threatened to overwhelm Mark. How could he explain any of this to his son? The ring, Sarah's illness, the tangled web of their connection. It was too much to process, let alone translate for a child. "Don't miss what happens next." Subscribe to our channel for more heartfelt stories that explore the complicated nature of human connections. Yes, buddy, Mark finally said, his voice rough with emotion. Sarah found it for us. It wasn't the whole truth, but it wasn't a lie either. He met Sarah's gaze over Ethan's head, seeing both gratitude and fear in her eyes. Whatever her initial motives, she had become important to them both. The question was whether that connection could survive the revelations of tonight. After settling Ethan back to bed with promises of explanations in the morning, Mark returned to find Sarah standing by the window, her silhouette outlined by streetlights. "I should go," she said without turning around. "I've dropped enough bombs for one night." "Stay," Mark said, surprising himself with the firmness in his voice. "We're not done talking." Sarah turned, her expression guarded. "What is there to say? I came into your life under false pretenses. I'm dying. And now I'm asking for your help. It's too much to ask of anyone, especially you." Mark crossed the room to stand before her, close enough to see the flecks of gray in her blue eyes. "Why did you really stay? You could have returned the ring anonymously. You could have moved away once your conscience was clear." "Because I fell in love with your son," Sarah admitted, her voice breaking. "And then, God help me, I fell in love with you. I stayed because for the first time in my life, I found something worth being better for. Someone worth changing for." The confession hung between them, as momentous as her earlier revelations. Mark felt his heartbeat accelerate, the rhythm changing in a way that had nothing to do with shock or anger. Despite everything, the lies, the illness, the impossible situation, he recognized the truth in her words because he felt it too. Somewhere between movie nights and school pickups, between shared meals and quiet conversations, he had fallen in love with his neighbor. "I don't know what happens next," Mark admitted, taking her hand. "I don't know how to help you fight this, or how to tell Ethan, or what it means for us. But I do know I'm not letting you face it alone." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "I don't want your pity, Mark." "This isn't pity," he assured her, his voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside him. "This is me choosing to stand by someone I care about, regardless of how we got here or how much time we have." If you're feeling the emotional impact of Mark's decision, hit that like button and let us know in the comments if you've ever had to make a difficult choice for someone you love. The weeks that followed were a blur of doctor appointments, fundraising efforts, and difficult conversations. Mark organized a community benefit at the high school where he taught, rallying students and faculty around Sarah's cause without revealing the full extent of her condition. Ethan, with the resilience of youth, accepted Sarah's illness with a determination to make her better, that both broke and strengthened his father's heart. But it was the quiet moments that defined their new reality. Sarah teaching Ethan to play chess during her good days, Mark reading aloud to her during her bad ones, the three of them creating memories against the ticking clock of her prognosis. They didn't speak of love again, as if by mutual agreement. There were more pressing concerns, more immediate needs. Then came the day when everything changed again. Sarah's oncologist called with news that sent Mark racing to her apartment, heart pounding with fear and hope. He found her sitting on her balcony, staring at nothing, her phone still in her hand. "Sarah," he called, approaching cautiously. "What did the doctor say?" She turned to him, her expression unreadable. "They found a donor," she said, her voice hollow with disbelief. "Someone to cover the treatment in Switzerland. Anonymous. All the arrangements have been made." Mark felt a surge of relief so powerful it nearly brought him to his knees. "That's incredible news. Why aren't you celebrating?" "Because I don't understand why," Sarah admitted, her eyes searching his. "Who would do this? Who even knows besides you and Ethan?" Mark shook his head, equally mystified. The fundraiser had been successful but nowhere near the amount needed for the experimental treatment. "Does it matter?" "This is your chance, Sarah. You have to take it. It matters to me, she insisted, rising from her chair with sudden energy. I've spent my life taking the easy way out, making compromises, accepting help that came with strings attached. That's how I ended up working for a criminal in the first place. I need to know there's no catch this time. Mark understood her fear, but the stakes were too high for hesitation. Sometimes good things happen, Sarah. Sometimes people help because they can, because they should. You taught me that. The intensity in her eyes softened. Did I? Every day since you moved in next door, he confirmed, taking her hands in his. Now it's your turn to accept help, to fight with everything you've got. Ethan and I will be here when you get back. We're approaching the most critical moment in Sarah and Mark's journey. If you're invested in their story, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the conclusion. The night before Sarah's departure for Switzerland was spent at Mark's house, the three of them huddled on the couch watching Ethan's favorite superhero movie. The boy had fallen asleep between them, his head on Sarah's lap, his feet pressed against his father's thigh. The familiar weight of him, the comfortable silence between the adults, created an illusion of normalcy that made the impending separation even more painful. I need to tell you something, Sarah said softly, careful not to wake Ethan. About the ring. Mark tensed. They hadn't spoken of it since that first night, both of them tacitly agreeing to focus on the present rather than the past. You don't have to. I do, she interrupted gently. Because if something happens to me in Switzerland, I want you to know the whole truth. She took a deep breath. I didn't just recognize the ring from your photos. I was there the night of the break-in. The revelation hit Mark like a physical blow. You were in my house? While my wife was still alive? Sarah nodded, her expression anguished. I was the lookout. I never entered, but I knew what was happening. I didn't know there would be violence, they promised no one would get hurt. When I heard about the accident weeks later, I couldn't stop thinking that if I had made different choices, maybe she would still be alive. Mark struggled to process this new information. The break-in hadn't directly caused his wife's death, that had been a separate tragedy, a rainy night and a drunk driver, but the theft had devastated her, had been a source of ongoing distress in their final weeks together. The connection between Sarah and that pain was more direct than he had imagined. Why tell me this now? He asked, his voice barely controlled. Because you deserve to know who I really am before you decide if I'm worth waiting for, Sarah answered, her honesty brutal and necessary. I'm not just the woman who returned something precious. I'm also the woman who helped take it away in the first place. Mark looked down at his sleeping son, at the peaceful trust on his face, then back at Sarah. The anger he expected to feel was there, but it was tempered by something else. An understanding of how people could change, of how the worst mistakes could lead to the most meaningful redemptions. We've all done things we regret, he said finally. What matters is who we choose to be now. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. And who am I to you now, Mark? After everything? The question demanded complete honesty. You're the woman who brought light back into our home, he said, reaching across Ethan to take her hand. You're the person who taught my son to laugh again after his mother died. You're someone I can't imagine living without, even though I might have to. His voice broke on the last words, the reality of her illness crashing back over him. I'm going to fight, Sarah promised, squeezing his hand. Not just for me, but for both of you. For whatever future we might have. That's all I ask, Mark said, his heart beating with a rhythm that had become familiar whenever she was near. Part fear, part hope, part love. If Sarah's journey has touched your heart, please like and share this video. Your support helps us continue bringing these emotional stories to life. The morning of Sarah's departure dawned clear and cold. Ethan clung to her at the airport, extracting promises of video calls and souvenirs. Mark stood slightly apart, giving them space for their goodbyes, trying to memorize every detail of her. The way sunlight caught in her blonde hair, the determined set of her jaw, the gentle patience with which she answered Ethan's endless questions. When it was his turn to say goodbye, words failed him. Instead, he pressed something into her hand, his late wife's ring, now strung on a simple chain. "Take this with you," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "It survived loss before. It can survive this too." Sarah's eyes widened. "Mark, I can't." "You can," he insisted. "It doesn't belong in a box anymore. It belongs with someone who understands its value, who knows what it means to lose and find something precious." He closed her fingers around it. "Bring it back to us when you're better." The promise in those words, of return, of healing, of future, hung between them. Sarah nodded, slipping the chain around her neck, the ring disappearing beneath her sweater, close to her heart. "I will," she vowed. Their goodbye kiss was brief but profound, witnessed by an oblivious Ethan who was more interested in the planes taking off outside the terminal windows. It contained everything they hadn't said aloud: fear, hope, regret, and most of all, love that had grown in the most unlikely soil. 6 months later, Mark sat on his porch swing, watching Ethan ride his bike up and down the sidewalk. The summer evening was perfect. Warm without being hot, the neighborhood peaceful except for the occasional sound of children playing. He checked his phone for the 100th time that day, though he knew there would be no message. Sarah's last update had come 3 days ago, a cryptic text that said only, "Coming home." Everything has changed. He had no idea what to expect. The treatment had been experimental, the updates infrequent and clinical. Sarah had maintained her privacy throughout, sharing little about her physical condition and focusing instead on funny stories about Switzerland, questions about Ethan's school progress, and observations about the books Mark had sent her. Whether this was to protect them or herself, he couldn't say. The sound of a car pulling into the driveway next door drew his attention. A taxi, unusual in their suburban neighborhood. Mark stood, his heart suddenly racing. Ethan noticed too, abandoning his bike on the lawn and running toward the vehicle. "Is it her, Dad? Is Sarah home?" he called over his shoulder, excitement making his voice crack. Before Mark could answer, the taxi door opened. Sarah emerged slowly, looking both familiar and changed. Her blonde hair was shorter, framing her face in a way that emphasized her cheekbones. She was thinner but stood straighter, as if the weight she had lost was more than physical. And her smile. God, her smile when she saw Ethan running toward her, it contained all the light in the world. Mark moved without conscious thought, drawn to her like gravity. He reached her just as Ethan threw himself into her arms, the three of them colliding in an embrace that felt like coming home. "You're back," he managed to say, his voice thick with emotion. "Are you?" He couldn't finish the question, too afraid of the answer. Sarah met his gaze over Ethan's head, her blue eyes clear and direct. She reached for the chain around her neck, pulling out the ring that had traveled with her across the ocean and back. "I kept my promise," she said simply. Then, with Ethan still clinging to her waist, she added the words Mark had been waiting months to hear: "The treatment worked. I'm in remission." The world seemed to stop, then restart with new colors, new sounds, new possibilities. Mark pulled her close again, feeling her heartbeat against his chest, strong, steady, alive. Whatever came next, explanations about the mysterious donor, decisions about their relationship, the inevitable challenges of recovery, they would face it together. "Welcome home," he whispered against her hair, his own heart beating with a rhythm that had nothing to do with fear now, only joy and the promise of tomorrow. If this story touched your heart, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs a reminder that second chances are possible, even in the darkest times. Your support helps us continue sharing stories of hope, redemption, and love that conquers all obstacles.